No one's writing vulnerabilities into their solutions. They're not trying to be negligent in that respect or create vulnerabilities and holes. What it is that people are humans. People have challenges. They also have time frames. They have commitments to other things. You can very easily get yourself drawn into code and be writing code, whether it be implementing infrastructure or writing firewall rules or writing some application. You can't stop that third party coming over to you and saying, "Hey, mate, hey, how did you get on last night? I heard you went out last night. Did you watch the football? Did you see the Eurovision? Did you see this? Did you see that?" Suddenly it takes your focus off these things.
Hey, Carl, thanks for being on today's episode. Obviously, we've had the privilege of working together for a few years, a couple of years back now. But just for listeners, can tell us a bit about Carl Pickering and what you do on a day-to-day?
Sure. Well, James, thanks for inviting me on. So as you mentioned, my name, Carl Pickering. So I'm a lead platform engineer for a weather services company called MetDesk. I have been involved in IT professionally since 1996. When I left school, immediately got myself a job. My area of expertise very quickly became apparent that I was more interested in Linux than I was anything else. So my career took me from a very early start down the Linux the world. Which, as you can imagine, back in those days was a very challenging environment. There wasn't, I mean, Google was literally just starting back in 2000 odd when I, really got my first breakthrough in a commercial environment. So yeah, I started off as a Linux engineer, and I've worked for a number of organizations as a Linux engineer. I've been a AWS architect, and I've also been a C-level exec as well as a CTO. But I decided that actually what I wanted to do was be more hands-on. So I positioned myself to take a step back in my career and go back into the coalface, as it were, and be there fighting fires at the front line with my teams to fix all the problems and solve the issues that we have, and using my knowledge to help strengthen our environments and our offerings to our customers as well.
I appreciate the overview, Carl. Thanks very much for that. And no, it was good. It was good to catch up with you a couple of days ago. We were having a chat about some of the good work that I know that you do in terms of making sure you're supporting cybersecurity functions. Because obviously you're not in thoroughbred cybersecurity, right? As part of your role. And yeah, look, for the listeners out there, I'm curious. How do you start to incorporate like cybersecurity, like validation into like your development, into your dev cycle, right? Like, how can you support your comrades on the other side of the shop floor?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So the first thing to note is that we're all human and mistakes can happen. We leverage IT to prevent those mistakes and to ensure that they're not as damaging as they could be. So we limit them. We operate in a space where we take the dev from DevOps and the ops from DevOps and be ourselves. And we work with our dev teams to give them the technology that they need to safely deploy at scale. So we will work with our CI/CD pipelines to undertake security scanning from the start. So we'll look for any vulnerabilities in our code that we're deploying. We'll look for any secrets that are in there that could be exposed. We'll also do, code linting as well to make sure that things are okay. We'll generate a SBOM, software bill of materials, to make sure that there are absolutely no vulnerabilities being published out there. But we can also use that stuff to help us understand the technology that we've got out in the wild. So in the event of a CVE or a vulnerability, we can very quickly understand what's out there in the wild as we've presented it to the internet and to our platform.
So, I mean, that sounds like you've got quite a few like different plates you've got to spin there. I mean, Come on, talk us through that, right? Like, probably people here listening and probably doing those scans. There's probably the people in the same position as you, right? Trying to like manage that. How do you keep that going consistently?
So we spent effort first in developing a solution that worked by working with the teams to understand what they were doing to push code out and what they want to achieve at the end of it. And we then implemented the security frameworks around that deployment process to get us to a safe environment. So we implemented things like Trivy. So Trivy and Aquasec, when we push code, for example, the code is scanned to make sure that there are no vulnerabilities being pushed out, that we're using libraries that don't exist. We get reports back in our frameworks to say, and inside our CI pipelines, that actually what you're pushing either has a known vulnerability or is actually really outdated and should be reviewed, so that the development teams can then ascertain whether or not they should go back, redevelop the code that they're working on and push them out. Now, we don't just rely on things like that. We do good training with our teams, and the teams that I've worked with at other companies in the past. It's all about mentoring and coaching them. We are both trying to achieve the same thing, which is pushing out reliable software and pushing out reliable infrastructure to our clients so that they can transact. We don't want to be a challenge, and we don't want to be putting up blockers and preventing our teams from being able to deploy at velocity. We also don't want to prevent them, when something does break, for them to be able to get a fix out very, very quickly. So we look at our framework and our tool sets, and we also look at the public internet. We're very often looking at things like CVEs. We're working with third-party security companies to understand what's out there in the wild right now. We're constantly and regularly reviewing our code changes to make sure, that what we're actually doing is the right way forward. And, is someone's not actually just doing something for velocity. All the changes are peer reviewed. We're making sure that, as I said, mentioned, we're not pushing out secrets, and we're not pushing out legacy tech, or are we exposing personal access tokens that someone could use against us to break into the infrastructure. What we found is that working with our development teams across the businesses that I've been in and involving them in this practice is that they actually have an appreciation for it. They come along with us on this journey. They're there to support us, and we're there to support them. We're not there to get in the way and to demand that they follow our steps. We want to understand from them what problems and challenges they've faced, because the likelihood is that we're not the first people to have come along and said, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. The chances are that in any organization to this date, that people have already tried. Now, they're likely to have succeeded with all the challenges that are out there right now, and with all of the software-based technology that exists. Implementing these solutions is so much quicker than what it used to be. Back when I started, things were very much more manual. Now it's a case of installing either a workflow or subscribing to a SaaS service that does everything for you, either in the cloud or on-prem. But we bring our teams along with us on this journey. We listen to their concerns, we help them overcome them, but also we use their concerns to help tailor the solution. Our answer isn't always the right answer. What we do is we work in relationships with them and as a partnership to come to the right conclusion and to implement security from the ground up. We are there to do the same thing. We're all there to make sure that we're successful.
I guess so. Effectively, you're getting their criteria of what their definition of good looks like, right? In terms of their output, like what they're trying to achieve, and then start to map that into obviously your framework and policies. I guess my question then would be, it's very chicken and egg, right? You're touching on the people and the process there, right? Which in your experience should you focus on first? Because it'd be very easy to go and think, right, take a bird's eye view of everything. If we'd had our utopian sort of way of doing things, I could create a process. But unless you get the buy-in, you can't have the process. But then equally, if you don't get the buy-in, yeah, you need both, right? Like you said there, the only way that you were able to, go to these other teams and sort of get their input and found they were very supportive and realized that you weren't a blocker, it's because you create that advocacy, right? They were supportive of the process because you had the people on board, right? How do you start, like where's the starting point, I guess, on that journey, right? Someone in your shoes taking a leadership position.
Okay. So, I mean, this is very chicken and egg, of course. In an ideal world, you create a company and you put everything in at day one. You put all of the building blocks in place, and you then employ people, and you say go, and they just immediately start working, and it all fits into place. The reality is, it doesn't work that way. People are already developing, they're already building out their infrastructure, they're already building out their systems or their solutions or their products. You have to understand what they've got. You have to understand what they're dealing with and what it is that they're trying to achieve. And it is very much a workshop of understanding how they are currently operating and how we can lend security solutions to that operations to, solve problems, and ensure that they're not pushing any problems out there. And this is all, my comments here are all sort of sounding as if we're blaming dev as the problem here. Absolutely not. What we're trying to do is we're just trying to, one source, which is development, is push out, good factored code that doesn't have vulnerabilities, that can go out to the internet, on our platform and our products, and not present any security vulnerabilities. And we'll work with, third-party vendors like pen testing companies or bounty schemes to ensure that there's being regularly tested to make sure that everything is okay. And we can implement our own third-party tooling as well with SaaS-based solutions to ensure that that's the case as well. But we have to, of course, look at it from the operation side as well. We're building servers, we're writing firewall rules, we're also deploying stuff into the cloud. So we're using Terraform or Cloud Development Kit or, Pulumi or something like that. And we also have to have the same principles apply to us. We shouldn't be lording it over people and thinking that we're God because we have the SSH keys. The reality is that we're under as much governance and control as anyone else in the business. We're responsible for pushing safe infrastructure, safe platforms, safe interactions with our third parties that we work with. And so, long story short, it's all about communication. It's about understanding the problem and where we need to get to by having that discussion. And those discussions are, right, this is where we're at right now. We want to get to an environment where we have the following implemented. And it might be that we're trying to do that not because there is a problem. And 9 times out of 10, there isn't problems. People are not writing bad code. Arguably, people might say, that there is some people out there that might write bad code, but no one's writing vulnerabilities into their solutions. They're not trying to be negligent in that respect or create vulnerabilities and holes. What it is that people are humans. People have challenges. They also have time frames. They have commitments to other things. You can very easily get yourself drawn into code and be writing code, whether it be implementing infrastructure or writing firewall rules or writing some application. You can't stop that third party coming over to you and saying, hey, mate, hey, how did you get on last night? I heard you went out last night. Did you watch the football? Did you see the Eurovision? Did you see this? Did you see that? Suddenly it takes your focus off these things. So by knowing what our target is, and our target is to have replicable builds that are safe and secure, that have no vulnerabilities, and we have an output that shows this information, that has gone through checks and balancings, and maybe even through Gatekeeper or through peer review and pull requests, we can put out good platforms, good code. And so we know where we want to get to, and we take people on those journeys.
I guess as part of that as well, I'm just imagining the way that you would go to and say, well, I'm actually pitching our old office, like walking over from one side to the other. I'm just thinking as well, like, that's all well and good when we talk about, as you said, vulnerabilities, mistakes, that the human sort of elements, mistakes as part of the job there. But I guess you kind of got onto it a moment ago when you talk about using external tools to help you, or like pen testers to help you, right? How do you ensure that your team tries to stay as up to date as reasonable with, threats, vulnerabilities, things that are out there in the wild, right? Because everything we talked about is you controlling, your QA effectively internally, right? What about the unknown unknowns?
So the first thing is we're not browsing the dark web. Nor would I recommend that anyone browses the dark web, especially on a corporate device. You want to do that at home, by all means. I don't ask any of my teams in any of the businesses that I've worked at to do that, but I do ask them to keep on top of the industry. And there are regular trade shows. You've got InfoSec Europe, which is a fantastic resource of like-minded um, advocates of security, technology, and frameworks, and IT problem solvers that are there in one place with a shared view on we need to make things secure. Going to trade shows, going to local meetups, going to conferences where there's specific targets and topics on discussion that you want to look at. In my local town, there's one every 3 months. There's a meetup, and sometimes they're not always great. They're not the ones that the area that I want to pay attention to, because it's talking about things that are not in my wheelhouse, not in my technology area. But still going along and listening to the people have similar problems to me, and then networking with the people around there, I find that I'm not alone. I'm not the only person out there. And so some of that information we then feed back into the teams, or we ask the teams to attend those events. We pay attention to obviously the industry news. There are various websites out there. You've obviously got Reddit. There's some very good subreddits on there at the moment. You've got Hacker News Network, which is presented by Y Combinator, big incubator system in America. They have a news-based article system, which is submitted to by the community. There's a lot of good articles on there. There's some articles that not necessarily as part of cybersecurity, or even indeed just IT and in general, but there's some very interesting stuff on there. Stick to mainstream media. There are also some closed off blog sites as well. We keep an eye on the CVEs. We talk to our industry partners as well. So we talk to our third parties. We understand what they're coming up with as well, because they're the ones that are seeing these things happening across a larger scale. We're seeing things that are reported into the news and hearing about them after the fact. So you mentioned at the start of this podcast that there have been some very recent exposures here in the UK, and certainly, we hear about them after the fact. We don't know about them before this happens. But if you speak to the third-party companies that are there as your pen testers, or as your edge-based networking computing companies, they know about these attacks. They're hearing about them because they're sitting in front of them and saying, stopping all this traffic from coming through. And if you have a good relationship with them, they will bring you up to speed with a few things. So we pay attention to the industry in that respect. I would like to say that browsing the dark web would often yield some results, but the challenges with browsing things like the dark web, or even some of these really locked down forums and such, you can get yourself into a bit of a situation where you're looking at things that you have no control over, and so I'd advise people not to go and look at those things. There's a lot of uncontrolled things being publicized and published on these forums and these dark web websites. So I avoid them where I can. I'm too old to see things like that anymore. I'm not interested in that stuff.
Yeah. Plus, again, come back to your earlier point, right? You're only human. No matter, even if you're trained, like phishing still gets through. You might still click on something. You might still make the wrong call at the wrong time. Yeah, exactly that. Okay, I don't know if you could jump into then, and it doesn't have to be any time recent. What event have you and your team been able to kind of identify? Once you put all these processes in, this framework and everything, right? Don't know if you could run us through a a vulnerability or an event that you caught before it went out to the wild.
I worked for an organization, and there was a big vulnerability that came out. If you remember, it was Log4j.
Yep.
So the big Log4j vulnerability that came out, and you had other ones as well, like Heartbeat or Heartbleed. My memory escapes me on that one. It's such a long time. I can barely tell you what I did yesterday, James. I'll be honest with you. But the Log4j one definitely springs to mind. And you know, we were obviously a Java house. We were pushing code out quite aggressively, and we were pushing changes into our platforms. And then suddenly there's this issue that's exposed, and everyone's aware of it, and it's Log4j. We didn't have as many systems in place then as people do have now, or have the ability to do now, because the ecosystem's evolving and knowledge is evolving, and there are companies popping up to fix these problems. But I remember the issue being found, and I remember there being a mad scramble to check everywhere where we were vulnerable, but then also the mad panic to patch it. And I remember some very late nights, multiple conversations with the team about how we can fix this problem, ultimately without impacting our production environments, because we didn't want to take the business offline. We didn't want to stop people from transacting with us. What helped us in this environment was how on board the business were with this issue. It became a big thing. Every technological or technology-based forum or news article, publishing house that was out there was talking about this problem. And so it wasn't hard for us to get the support and the buy-in from the business to be able to deploy, through the day, through the night, take systems down, to patch them, and fix this problem with Log4j once the vulnerability had been patched, because it went unpatched for a while. I can't remember the exact time, but there was a period where everyone's like, yeah, we're vulnerable. How do we fix this? And then the patch came around, and it was obviously a mad scramble to fix it, because it was such an impactful vulnerability that you didn't want to be out there on the internet with this exposure. So we worked very hard to get that out there. Now, if we come forward multiple years and we had what we know now, and we have the systems in place now, we potentially wouldn't have found the issue the same way, because it was found in a completely different way. And how they diagnosed the problem, it was like a 0 day. It was almost someone did something to exploit this line of code that suddenly caused a massive issue, and your tool sets that we have now would find what was then found now, but they wouldn't have found it back then, because no one really knew about it. And those tool sets can only really find what they know about, but they give you some confidence that you're not pushing out bad things. We would have, in a situation now, if we had an event of similar size to Log4j, our time to resolve that issue is accelerated tenfold, because businesses have CI/CD pipelines. They have a better understanding of how to deploy at velocity. Whether they're using Ansible, or they're using Puppet or Chef or Salt, some configuration management system that allows them to push changes very, very quickly. Or they're building golden images on the fly using their CI/CD pipeline systems and Packer, or they're able to push infrastructure using Terraform or Pulumi. We now have better tooling to fix these problems very, very quickly. Whereas before, things took a long time, but we had the company buy-in. They helped us achieve these things. Today, businesses are a lot more open to cybersecurity events. You have better frameworks. You have Cyber Essentials here in the UK. You've obviously got things like ISO 27001 accreditation. And as part of these, you need to go through due diligence with your IT team, making sure that you have things like antivirus, that you have malware protection, that you're not susceptible to phishing attacks or spam attacks, that people don't have admin level privileges, that you can track the machines, that you have asset controls just from an endpoint perspective. And there's like 20 different points just to get one green tick essentially from that side of things. From your infrastructure side of things, it's even more. There's so much more that you have to attain to. I'm going off topic slightly here, but the thing that I'm trying to say is that back then we didn't have the luxury of all of these automation tools, all of these things that will give us insight into what was going on. Now we have those tooling, we have those facilities to be able to push out changes very, very quickly. I think it was Facebook that said, I'm trying to remember the exact phrase here. I think it was prepare to fail. No, fail fast. I think it was. They had something like fail fast. I remember seeing it on a printout that they had in a frame that someone had published to Dig, which was one of the old news sites. That Facebook had this thing that said, you will fail fast and recover quicker, or something like that. I can't remember the exact thing, but in my mind, and when I'm talking to my team, the thing I say to them is that you're going to make mistakes. We just need to be able to resolve them very quickly. We have those tooling. Vulnerabilities are found. We can patch them very quickly. We can get that fix out to the estate very, very quickly. So we're in such a better place now because of all the technology changes that are out there, and the fact that people like myself have created businesses because they've come up with problems. Like, oh, I wish I had X, Y, and Z to fix this problem, and have then created that technology to fix those problems.
No, I couldn't agree more. Right, tools are better, everything's better, and it just happens with the times, right? The more that these known threats and things come about, you have to adapt, you have to overcome, you have to evolve. So it's very clear that in your past experiences, you've got a lot of support from the business. That meant
Not always.
not always.
We've had
I agree with
support,
that.
but most of the time, yeah.
I would say that to some people that might be considered a bit of a luxury. Right? I've spoken with many businesses that even in their reports and everything, they put cybersecurity, at a high probability, high impact sort of level. Yet nobody can still, deep pocket, short arms sort of mentality from the business. So I'll give you a bit of an example and be interested to kind of hear your thoughts. Say you're working for software vendor. They want to get some new releases out. And that release has been driven by sales and marketing and product owners, right? They see a gap in the market. They want to release something fast. They want to capture the market as fast as possible. There will be pressures placed on you and those teams. And we do see from time to time corners cut, or as you said, people are people. They will make mistakes. They will do their overtime. There'll probably be somebody that'll stay up till all hours of the night, still, writing some code, and then they're back in the office again 8, 9 a.m. the next day. And they're flagging, right? That happens a lot. So from a leadership position or a managerial position, like how do you strike that balance in those scenarios, right? Where you've got pressure above, but you know that if it comes past you, the long-term impact will be negative for the business. How do you strike that balance?
It's an interesting one. So you're asking me, how do I get the business on that journey, and how do I get them to release the purse strings or give us the freedom to fix the problems and not present any issues? So people that run businesses are usually very successful at what they do, but they're very successful businessmen. They're not necessarily good with technology. They're good at selling, or they're good at doing something else. Businesses hire people to solve problems. You hire IT people to manage your IT and to solve your IT issues. You hire developers to write your code, and you hire infrastructure engineers to manage the infrastructure. You hire accountants to do your books. In the nicest possible way, you have to sit down with the business, despite their pressures, and say to them, you've hired me to do a job. You've hired us. You've put your trust in us and your faith in us to deliver what we're going to deliver. This is no exception. Let us do this right. We need to be able to get to the end goal for you that doesn't make us look bad. We can easily, deploy very quickly or write code that, does things really simply, but at what cost? If we push out bad code, or we push out systems that fall over, or vulnerabilities that expose customers' PII data, what's that going to cost to the business? What's the brand damage, the reputational damage? What happens if it is PII data? Suddenly you have to then start answering legal questions. You then have to start reporting yourself to the ICO and say, I'm very sorry, we've had a breach. Here's all the customer data that we've leaked. And one of the questions is, why? We had a deadline. Well, the people that are answering the question in the first instance will go, I don't know. I'll go speak to the team that did that. And why did you do that? And what happened? And the answer is, because you put a deadline on us. You forced us to get things out quicker. But if you sit with them and try and have that conversation and come to a reasonable understanding that, we're there to do that job. We're there to do it with the best interest of the business, the best interest of our customers, to get things out safely. We will get things out safely. It's a communication thing. We have to bring not only our teams, like our development teams, on our journey with us to get things out safely and securely. We need to bring the business with us on that journey as well. And, putting it simply to the business, if things go wrong, what's the cost to the business? What does it look like? And of course, you get the argument of, well, might not happen. You're absolutely right. It might not happen. I also might not drive my car and have a car crash. But what if I do? And I've got insurance. Well, my insurance covers me. Yes, it's a nightmare and I've got to go through all the hoops to get my insurance paid for. What happens if I then realize, well, actually, I don't have insurance? Well, I'm breaking the law for a start, so I'm going to get in trouble. I'm then lost the value of my car, and I might drive a really nice car and suddenly it's all gone. What happens if I have a car crash and someone loses their life? So all these problems and all these risks that can happen. If I have insurances and I have protections, I'm protecting myself against some of the elements of what could happen. I'm not protecting everything, and of course I hope to God that I don't have a car crash and I don't injure someone. And I hope to God that none of your listeners are in that situation as well. But bring your businesses on your journey, involve them at every opportunity, and have the conversations with them to help you achieve the common goal. You're all there for the same reason. You're there to do the best for the business and the best for the customers involved. Put your mindset on the customer's end. What happens if, your product goes down and your customer is in an urgent need to use your product, but the product's offline? That customer's going to get really frustrated. What they're going to do? They're not going to renew. They're going to go somewhere else. Put yourself in that mindset. What happens? Explain that to the business. The business will inevitably get it. They'll understand it. They might argue it. And of course, there are business out there that absolutely just can't afford it. In which case, that's when the real, the hackers put their hats on back to front and they sit there and code for hours on end and get things fixed and push it out, and those are the real heroes, those that have been working really hard to get things out there. But it's not safe, and at what cost? Work-life balances are important. Being able to sleep at night is important. Being able to, spend time with your family is very, very important. I've done both sides. I've worked late nights. I've worked long days. I've done very heavy stints, but I've also had the support of the business. I've also not had the support of the business as well in the past. Um, I'm lucky. The business I'm with right now is very much on board with security, and they want to know about our security posture. They want to know how things are looking. They want to know where we're up to on certain things. The business I work for, I'm very lucky. They're great. They listen to us. They offer insightful questions, and they challenge us, not because they don't want to part with time and ultimately money, because time is money in a business, but because they want to make sure that we've thought of everything and that we're doing the right thing that we can.
No, appreciate it. And Carl, thank you very much for being on today's episode. Hey, look, if any of the listeners want to reach out to you, get your advice, maybe they're going through the same scenario, maybe they're interested in, putting in their own sort of frameworks, what's the best place people can reach you?
So LinkedIn is the easiest way to get in touch with me. I'm by no stretch of the imagination an expert at anything. I'm there to help. I'll listen to anyone and I'll give some advice. And hey, even if you want to correct me on some things, please do. I'm happy to do that.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you very much for being on today's show, Carl.
You're welcome, James. Thanks very much, mate.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Take care. Bye.